Jacob, what is there to keep the drones just on the border? What is there to restrain local police from asking the feds to spy on somebody? Stated differently, isn't this the beginning or the likely beginning of a slippery slope to the government watching us wherever we go?
Of course. It's just the same concept of cameras on every street corner. I mean, why don't we just put a camera in everybody's home and car? That'll keep everybody really safe. I came across an article, I don't know how reliable it is, but where a county in North Carolina has been using drones to monitor a motorcycle group at a fairgrounds because they look suspicious. This is the type of thing that inevitably happens when you have government having this kind of military-type power, Judge.
Wayne, you would agree that the drones and the government has no business spying on ordinary Americans. You would only support this if this were kept to the borders looking at people trying to get in.
That is correct, Judge. And listen, I worked and battled way too long for too many years to protect the rights and civil liberties of Americans. I'm not about to endorse anything or allow anyone, quite frankly, and would do everything in my power to prevent it, to spy on Americans. That's not what we do with this. And by the way, these drones would not necessarily be owned by the military. They would be private.
Got it. Wayne Simmons, Jacob Hornberger, thanks for joining us. We'll be right back.
America's history. In school, we learn about turning points in our nation, like Gettysburg and Pearl Harbor, 9/11. I think today will be remembered as one, the times we're living in now. These have always been things that have united us. But now we're not a nation united anymore. Because history has been changed, we have been taught falsehoods. If we want to unite, we have to learn about our country. I told you about a book that I said every American should own. It's a Patriot's History to the United States. Well, now Larry Schweikart has come up with a new one, 7 Events That Made America, America. It is out now and available everywhere. Larry is a history professor at the University of Dayton and author of the new book, 7 Events That Made America, America. I love the subtitle, and prove that the Founding Fathers were right all along. Larry, that is the thing that I think I realized, I guess, about a year ago. You're like, hey, wait a minute, that's what they were talking about. We've erased so much that now that you restore it, things kind of make sense, don't they?
Well, each one of these chapters, I tried to find what would the founders have thought about this event. Where would they have gone with it? Would they have approved? Would they have said, yeah, that's the way we expected Americans to respond? Or would they have said, oh, did they ever get this one wrong?
They would have they wouldn't even recognize America anymore. They would have said, when did you stop living the Constitution, do you think?
Exactly. I mean, when we talk about the war on meat, it's inconceivable that Washington would ever allow anyone to tell him what to eat.
Right.
I mean, he would start polishing up that old musket out there.
And this is the great thing about this. I mean, because you could say, well, the war on meat, but unless you know where the war on meat actually started, you don't know how exactly to feel about it. You don't know where it sits, the story on the war on meat.
Well, it starts with Eisenhower having a heart attack on a golf course. And, you know, they rush him, they take him home. He's got indigestion. They take him home. Pretty soon it's clear he's having a heart attack, and they take him to the hospital. Very soon after that, people start paying attention to fats and cholesterol. And then you get the kind of scientist who's very aggressive and decides, I'm going to make this my cause. His name's Ancel Keys. And before you know it, they've got all these studies going on, and he's already starting to say, this is what the studies show. They prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that fat and meat equal cholesterol. High cholesterol equals heart attacks. We've got to cut fat and cholesterol. Only problem is it was incomplete science. They didn't have the result of all the science in yet.
Right.
Does this sound familiar?
Right.
Maybe like global warming?
Yeah.
And by the time the results of all the science does come in, they show a completely different picture. In fact, they show there's probably no correlation between fats and meats.
There's a story in the book that I think is probably one of the most important stories to understand in history, and that is the turning point of using government to buy votes. It's where our government really started getting big. Tell me about the, because in contemporary history, the turning point that rock and roll played in Russia, Soviet Union.
Well, this is an amazing story because when you think about it, the art form of our day, rock and roll music, dominates the world. You don't go anywhere in the world without hearing American rock, usually of the 70s and 80s variety, right? It was created without a dime of federal money. There's no National Endowment of the Arts money going to rock and roll. It's created totally outside the system. It starts bleeding over into Europe. I kid you not. The Soviet Union creates a ministry of rock to counteract it. They try to co-opt these Soviet rock and roll skis, right? They're going to bring them in and they give them food subsidies and apartment vouchers as long as they play what the government wants them to play. And of course it doesn't work.
That was a taste of Glenn's interview with Larry Schweikart. You can see the full interview on an upcoming show. When we began this show, I cautioned about the dangers and the futility of putting our physical safety and even the rules of the road into the hands of the federal government. The feds keep changing rules depending on political winds, and they don't care about the Constitution. If the feds had let BP drill where the state of Louisiana permitted it to drill and where it wanted to drill, none of this would have happened. If BP had insurance instead of a liability cap, the cash would already have been set aside for a professional, not a political cleanup. Still, the feds haven't learned. Yesterday, as you know, the major stock exchanges delisted Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Those would be the huge banks that own hundreds of thousands of residential mortgages. These banks bought many thousands of mortgages from other banks. In fact, Fannie and Freddie encouraged reckless lending by buying up even mortgages they knew would go bust. Well, now, why would any bank do that? How could they stay in business if they bought mortgages that borrowers were not paying on? How could the investors in those banks keep management in their jobs when they're losing billions? In December 2007, Fannie was worth $38 billion. Today it is worth $600,000. In December 2007, Freddie was worth $26 billion. Today it is worth $500,000. What kind of crazy people would invest in these losers? Whose money was lost without a peep? You know the answer by now. The investors in these banks are the taxpayers. The management of these banks is the federal government. The real losers in these banks are you and me. Here's one for you. There's a knock at your door. You go to answer. A guy puts a gun at you and he says, "Give me your money. I want to invest it for you in a few failing banks." You call the police. Then you find out he is the police, come to collect your taxes. Will this madness never end? It will end when we send the people in the federal government packing and replace them with lovers of freedom who are faithful to the Constitution. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. If you want to watch more about raw liberty, catch me on Freedom Watch this Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Fox Business Network. From New York, defending freedom. Good night, America.